and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Dining with the Departed, where we talk about famous or infamous people who have passed. We discuss their lives and their careers, what they're famous or infamous for, and then I show you and taste their favorite food, sometimes their last meal. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. We love our celebrities here in America, probably more than in other places. And of all the celebrities that we love, there was no one as beloved as Betty White. Betty Marion White was born on January 17, 1922 in Oak Park, Illinois, to Christine Tess and Horace Logan White. When she was just a year old, her family moved to Los Angeles. During the Great Depression, her father built radios and traded them for things the family needed. Betty went to school in Beverly Hills and graduated from Beverly Hills High in 1939. She wanted to be a forest ranger, but female rangers weren't allowed at the time, so she began to pursue her interests in writing. She wrote and played the lead in a play in high school, and there her interest in acting was sparked. Betty started working as a model and a spokesperson. She was very beautiful and had a sweet girl-next-door quality about her. When World War II broke out, she volunteered for the American Women's Voluntary Services. She drove trucks with military supplies into the Hollywood Hills. Betty also performed for the troops at concerts held to raise their morale before being shipped overseas. While volunteering with the American Women's Services, she met Air Force pilot Dick Barker, and they were married in 1945. After the war, Betty was told that she wasn't photogenic enough for television. Like, are you kidding me? I'm telling you, the film industry, the music industry is brutal. So she began to work in radio. Betty would voice characters and sing songs, and she made $5 a show. In 1949, Betty began appearing as a co-host on a television show with Al Jarvis called Hollywood on Television. Al Jarvis left the show in 1952, and Betty began hosting it alone. She would sit on live TV for 5.5 hours, 6 days a week, and just ad-lib, no script. Can you believe that? She would also sing a couple of songs during each broadcast. I don't even know what to say to that. What do you talk about for 5.5 hours, 6 days a week with no script? On top of that, she had to learn songs to perform live every day. She probably knew a lot of songs from all the performing that she had been doing, but to perform 2 new songs every day, she's got to constantly be learning stuff. I spent about a year as the female vocalist in the Randy Anderson Band. It's a very popular country cover band here in the Southwest. They've been playing for decades. They're all older than I am, and they've been together a really long time. They're really good musicians, and because they've been together for so long, they had this huge repertoire of songs. So when I got the gig, I had to learn about 800 songs, and I had like 2.5 weeks to do it in, and it was a lot. It was a lot. The first few performances, I had to have my iPad on stage to help me out a little bit, but I can't imagine what it would be like to sit and have to ad-lib for 5.5 hours, 6 days a week, and then have to learn songs on top of that. I mean, that is some really incredible memorization skills and performance skills, right? Dick and Betty actually tried living in Ohio for a while, where Dick owned a chicken farm, but Betty did not enjoy that at all. They moved back to Los Angeles and were divorced within a year. They just didn't want the same things. Betty, for example, did not want to start having children. She was focused on her career. In 1952, one of the producers that had been working with Betty created a TV show just for her called Life with Elizabeth. Elizabeth wasn't Betty's actual name, as most people believed. Her given name is Betty. But Betty played the title character of Elizabeth, and she even won an Emmy for it in 1952. From 1952 to 1954, Betty hosted and produced her own daily talk show called The Betty White Show. So now she had an Emmy award-winning show and her own talk show. She was just 28 years old. Betty White was the only woman in that category in Hollywood, and the craziest part, she still lived at home with her parents. It was on The Betty White Show that Betty first faced controversy. She had a black performer, a tap dancer named Arthur Duncan, as a regular performer on the show. Racists wrote into the station demanding that he be removed from the show, or they were going to boycott it. To that, Betty replied, "I'm sorry, live with it." Because of her firm stance against racism, NBC canceled her show. Betty wasn't out of work for too long. She starred on Date with the Angels from 1957 to 1958. The 1960s was the era of the game show, and Betty White was perfect for that genre. She would often appear on Password and was also a regular guest on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. She entertained audiences on the game shows To Tell the Truth, I've Got a Secret, Match Game, and Pyramid. In 1963, Betty married television host Alan Loudon after she met him as a celebrity guest on Password. Alan proposed to Betty twice, but she finally accepted. They were married for decades until Alan died of stomach cancer in 1981. Larry King once asked Betty why she never remarried. She said, "Once you've had the best, who needs the rest?" On an episode of Inside the Actors Studio, James Lipton asked Betty White what she would like to hear God say to her if heaven exists, and Betty replied, "Come on in, Betty, here's Alan." Oh, my heart. That is one of the sweetest things I've ever heard. They obviously had a really deep and special love, and I just think that is so tender and sweet. I remember Betty White from some of those talk shows in the late 1970s and the early 80s. If it was like summer break, I would spend some time at my grandparents' house, and they would always have the daytime game shows on. I remember Betty White. She was always really smiley and really happy and kind of played the ditz. Sometimes she kind of acted like she didn't know what was going on, but she did. I actually remember Betty White and I remember Paul Lynde. Those are the two that really stand out in my memories. The 70s, man, what a time. Then Betty turned down what might have been her biggest career move yet, but probably one she would not have enjoyed. She was offered the position of anchor on NBC's new television show, The Today Show. She turned it down because she didn't want to live in New York City, and the role went to Barbara Walters. Betty then guest starred on The Mary Tyler Moore Show between 1973 and 1974, and this is where a new generation fell in love with her. She was 50 years old at this point, and many younger audience members didn't know who she was, but they would soon find out. Betty would often host the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and she appeared many times on The Carol Burnett Show. And then again, in 1977, she got her own show called The Betty White Show. In the early 1980s, Betty White became the first woman to win a daytime Emmy for her game show, Just Men. She then had a recurring role on Mama's Family playing Ellen Harper. Who remembers Mama's Family? I think that's a show that could not be made today, don't you think? It really did not make people in the South look very good, right? I think that and All in the Family definitely are two 70s shows that could not be made now. But I was actually watching an old episode of Seinfeld the other day, and they said some things, and I was like, oh, can't say that stuff anymore. And everybody likes to complain about woke culture. Nobody even knows what that means anymore. And, you know, how people have become oversensitive. But, you know, there are just some things that, I don't know, we probably should never have joked about in the first place. Of all the awards and all the success Betty had, it was her role that began in 1985 that she is perhaps most remembered and most loved for. In 1985, The Golden Girls was born. Betty was cast as Minnesota native Rose Nyland, and it was the role of a lifetime. Okay, where are my Golden Girls fans at? I have loved The Golden Girls for so long. I was obviously way too young to watch it when it was on originally, but I remember being in my 20s, and it was kind of a lonely time of life for me. I had 3 little kids at home, and I was alone a lot of the time, and I'd put the kids down for bed and I would turn on Nick at Night. Who remembers Nick at Night? And they would play this show called The Golden Girls. I didn't even realize how popular it had been, but it was very comforting to me. I felt like I was at my grandma's house, you know, with the older ladies, and they were so funny and the jokes were good, and there was something about that show that brought me a lot of comfort at kind of a lonely and hard time in my life, and I just fell in love with it. Honestly, I still watch The Golden Girls. It's kind of one of my comfort shows. I turn it on if I have insomnia or if I'm having a bad night, and it just makes me feel better. I love it. The Golden Girls ended in 1992, and then Betty White had some guest appearances on Empty Nest and Nurses, Suddenly Susan, and The Practice. She also played herself on an episode of The John Larroquette Show, and then she joined the soap opera The Bold and the Beautiful. She made movies with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds, and then she was asked to host Saturday Night Live in 2010 at age 88, making her by far the oldest person to ever host the show. Betty was then cast on Hot in Cleveland, where she was, again, introduced to an entirely new generation who loved her just as much as those that came before them. Betty did Hallmark movies and award shows, and I am telling you, this woman never stopped working. She was also an incredible philanthropist. She started a clothing line and donated all the proceeds to help animal charities. She was a major proponent for the Humane Society and against animal abuse. I once heard a story about how Betty White would sit outside of grocery stores and ask for donations for animal charities. Some people didn't recognize her, and others were like, "Did I just give $5 to Betty White?" She was a woman who never took her fame too seriously. She never took herself too seriously. She was a kind woman, a happy woman, and a woman we could talk about for a very long time. Betty continued making public appearances well into her 90s, and she took a lot of pleasure in her role in pop culture. She loved the memes and the jokes about how she was going to outlive everyone, and she loved the fact that she was known and adored by not only the younger generation, but their parents and their grandparents. There was nobody on earth like Betty White, and there won't ever be again. On Christmas Day 2021, Betty White suffered a stroke. She was hospitalized, but then went home to where she wanted to be. She knew what was coming. Betty died in her sleep at her Brentwood home on New Year's Eve 2021. She was 99 glorious years old. She was an advocate for animals, she was an advocate for minorities, and she was an advocate for the LGBTQ community. She was all about love, and she got love in return. She was and will always be an icon. So what was this wonderful woman's favorite food? I'm going to show you. Betty White's favorite food was hot dogs. She also loved French fries, and she loved red vines. Let's give it a taste. Is there anything better than a hot dog? Once in a while, a hot dog, I love them. She was such the all-American girl, so it really makes sense that she would love hot dogs. These fries look a little sad. They weren't very fresh when I got them. So good. She said if she couldn't have French fries, then she'd have potato chips, but she preferred fries with her hot dog. And she loved red vines. For my foreign viewers, red vines are a brand of red licorice. They taste a little different than some other red licorices. There's almost like a minty quality to the cherry flavor. Does that make sense? Now, it is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that foreign people cannot believe that we like red licorice. It is one of those candies that they think is just really, really not good. And I've even been told that in some cultures it tastes like their medicine. Their medicine is kind of this flavor, and so they really dislike red licorice. I've heard that from several foreign friends that I have, that they cannot believe that we eat this as candy because this is not good to them. But this is what a red vine is. That is the roller skating rink on a Saturday afternoon right there. Yep. There's a movie theater. This with some buttered popcorn. But yeah, red vines have their own unique flavor. I wouldn't even call it cherry. I don't know what it is. It's candy flavored. And there's a wintergreen, there's a minty quality. I mean, I wouldn't call that fruit at all. What flavor is that? It's a red vine. So Betty, wherever you are, I hope there's plenty of hot dogs, and I hope you have reunited with your beloved Alan. Thanks so much for a century of entertainment. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Departed. You know the drill. Hit the like button if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel, and you can even support me by joining my Patreon. The end goal there is to raise donations to give to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage. They cannot be tested because there is no money to test it. We are trying to raise money to help solve some cold cases. I sure appreciate you being here. It means more to me than I will ever be able to tell you. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.